Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything, Liam Parker muttered under his breath as he reached into his pocket, feeling the crumpled $40 bill he had been saving for the past week. The diner smelled of fresh coffee and toasted bagels, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above the worn formica tables, and the morning rush created a low hum of voices and clattering silverware. Across the room, Madison Hart sat behind the counter, shoulders hunched, tears glistening in her eyes as she wiped down the countertop, the tip of her penmanship trembling with exhaustion. Liam noticed the way the other customers glanced her way, some smirking, others barely hiding their impatience, their whispers floating over the clatter of plates and coffee cups. Without a second thought, he walked up to her, placing his hand lightly on her shoulder, and said in a quiet voice, "It's going to be all right. You don't have to carry it alone." Madison looked up, startled, her gray eyes wide, reflecting both surprise and something unspoken that made Liam pause for just a heartbeat. He pulled the crumpled bill from his pocket and held it out, not as a gesture of charity but as a simple human connection, a way to say, "I see you, I understand, and you matter." The world around them seemed to fade for a moment, the chatter, the laughter, the ringing of the bell over the door, all muted by the quiet weight of the exchange. Liam's fingers brushed hers as she hesitated, caught between pride and need, and the faintest trace of a smile flickered across her face. Behind him, a couple of regulars muttered under their breath, some shaking their heads, others pretending not to notice, but in that instant, none of it mattered. The diner felt smaller, warmer, and the sun pouring through the dusty windows cast long golden streaks across the floor, illuminating the ordinary clutter of menus, coffee cups, and napkin dispensers. Liam could feel the tension in Madison's shoulders begin to ease, the rigid lines of fatigue softening, and he realized that this simple act, $40, a gentle hand, a kind word, was more than he had thought it could be. He turned back to glance at the door for a brief moment, catching the first rays of sunlight glinting off the parking lot and the faded sign swinging gently in the morning breeze. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed almost musical now, accompanying the quiet rhythm of a heart beginning to trust again. Madison's lips parted in a whisper, almost inaudible, and Liam nodded, understanding the gravity of what he had just witnessed, a small miracle unfolding in plain sight, unnoticed by most, yet profound in its simplicity, as the clink of a coffee cup echoed across the diner, carrying with it the first trace of hope in a long, weary morning. The morning light shifted slightly through the dusty windows as Liam Parker moved behind the counter, stacking plates with careful precision while keeping an attentive eye on Madison Hart. The diner had settled into a rhythm after the initial rush, the soft clatter of silverware and the low murmur of conversation filling the spaces between the hum of the fluorescent lights. Madison wiped down the counters again, though now her movements were less tense, her shoulders easing with each motion, and Liam could not help but notice the faint trace of a smile that lingered on her lips, subtle yet unmistakable. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot in the corner, the steam curling gently into the air, carrying the warm aroma across the room, and he took a slow sip, savoring both the taste and the calm that had begun to settle over the diner. The bell above the door chimed softly as a late customer entered, the jingle cutting through the quiet rhythm like a gentle punctuation, and Liam offered a nod of greeting before returning to his task. He moved with a quiet efficiency, the way someone accustomed to balancing responsibility and care could, each motion deliberate, measured, yet unassuming. Madison, meanwhile, straightened her apron and glanced toward him, her eyes meeting his with a fleeting flicker of curiosity and gratitude, a silent acknowledgment of the gesture that had transpired moments before. Outside, the morning traffic hummed along the cracked asphalt, a distant soundtrack that added to the layered texture of the day, and the sunlight catching on the chrome of parked cars created fleeting glimmers that danced across the worn floorboards inside. Liam set down a plate of freshly prepared food on a table near the window, and for a moment paused, observing the small domestic choreography that unfolded around him, a father helping his son with a napkin, a young couple sharing a quiet laugh, the elderly man at the counter carefully spreading jam on his toast. The scene was ordinary, mundane in its details, yet imbued with the weight of everyday life, and it struck Liam how rare these quiet moments of connection could be, how much they depended on patience, attentiveness, and an openness to the humanity in others. Madison moved closer to the coffee machine, her hand steady now, the previous tremor gone, and Liam noted the faintest trace of relief on her face, a subtle release of tension that made the air feel lighter, the space between them charged with unspoken understanding. He reached for a towel to wipe down a spill on the counter and felt the smooth grain of the surface under his fingers, the ordinary textures grounding him, reminding him that acts of kindness, however small, could ripple outward in ways not immediately visible. The low hum of the refrigerator, the muted hiss of the coffee machine, and the faint rustle of pages from a newspaper left on a nearby table all combined into a quiet symphony of the everyday, each sound emphasizing the gentle cadence of the morning. Liam moved past Madison, setting down the towel and offering a nod that was at once both encouraging and respectful, a silent reinforcement of dignity and mutual recognition, and he watched as she took a deep breath, adjusting the angle of her shoulders and straightening the line of her back, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes about the relief and renewed confidence she felt. The light shifted again, highlighting the dust motes suspended in the air, each one catching the sunlight like tiny, floating stars, and for Liam, the moment was imbued with a quiet grace, a reminder that ordinary people could enact extraordinary acts through empathy and attentiveness, leaving a trail of warmth and possibility that lingered long after the brief interaction had passed. Madison paused, looking around the diner, and her gaze fell on Liam once more, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly, a quiet acknowledgment that the day, which had begun with tension and strain, now carried the soft promise of hope and recognition, a subtle unfolding of connection that would echo in small, meaningful ways throughout the hours to come. The morning lull settled over the diner as Liam Parker continued moving among the tables, each step measured, each action deliberate, yet performed without drawing attention to himself. Madison Hart refilled the sugar containers with careful precision, her hands steady, her breathing more even than it had been an hour before, the earlier tension slowly dissolving into the ambient warmth of the room. Liam's eyes wandered briefly toward the small stage at the corner where a local musician had left his guitar leaning against the wall, the faint scent of aged wood mingling with the rich aroma of brewing coffee. Outside, the sunlight now streamed through the windows at a sharper angle, casting long, golden shadows across the checkered floor, highlighting the worn edges of the tables and the slight imperfections in the tile pattern that made the diner feel lived in and genuine. A group of regulars sat at the counter, sipping their coffee in near silence, the occasional clink of spoons against mugs punctuating the quiet rhythm of the morning. Liam paused to straighten a chair, the scrape of its legs against the linoleum echoing faintly, and Madison glanced up, catching the subtle care in his movements, a silent communication passing between them that spoke of mutual respect and understanding without the need for words. The bell above the door chimed softly as another customer entered, drawing Liam's gaze for just a fraction of a second before returning to his work, the sunlight catching in the newcomer's hair and casting a halo effect that made the room feel both intimate and expansive at once. Madison wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the service area, arranging menus neatly, and Liam could see the faint relaxation in her posture, a gentle easing that mirrored the quiet calm spreading through the diner. He refilled his own coffee cup, noticing the steam curling upward, the soft hiss of the liquid against the mug, and took a measured sip, feeling the warmth spread and anchor him in the moment. The ordinary sounds of the diner, the soft murmur of conversation, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant clatter of a dish being set down, wove together into a tapestry of domestic life that felt both familiar and comforting. Madison's gaze drifted to Liam again, a subtle smile brushing her lips, and he offered a small nod in acknowledgment, a quiet reinforcement of the dignity and respect that had begun to build between them. Through the window, a light breeze moved the leaves of a nearby oak tree, the rustling a gentle backdrop that added depth to the morning, and Liam felt a subtle shift in the energy around them, a soft unfolding of possibility and trust. The sunlight shifted slightly as it climbed higher, highlighting the dust motes floating lazily in the air, and for a brief moment, the diner seemed suspended in a calm, almost cinematic stillness, each small motion and glance carrying weight and meaning. Madison adjusted the apron at her waist, her expression thoughtful, and Liam returned to wiping down a counter, noticing the quiet grace in her movements, the way she carried herself with resilience and care. The moment stretched, imbued with unspoken understanding, as if time itself had slowed to allow the connection between them to deepen without interference, the ordinary transformed into something quietly profound. The light continued to play across the room, illuminating the subtle smiles of both Liam and Madison, a delicate acknowledgment that amidst the hum of the morning and the routines of everyday life, something meaningful and rare had begun to take root, a small but undeniable trace of hope, recognition, and mutual respect. As the late morning sun climbed higher, Liam Parker wiped his hands on a clean rag and glanced toward the window, noticing the light spilling across the worn wooden floors in golden streams, highlighting the small imperfections in the tables and chairs that made the diner feel lived in and genuine. Madison Hart moved with quiet confidence behind the counter, arranging the freshly washed cups in neat rows, the faint gleam of the porcelain catching the sunlight and reflecting tiny patches of brilliance onto the walls. Liam poured himself another cup of coffee, the rich aroma mingling with the scent of toasted bread and brewed tea, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere that seemed to soften the edges of the day. He set the cup down and leaned against the counter for a moment, observing the subtle interactions of the few remaining patrons, the elderly man at the corner table carefully folding his newspaper, the young mother soothing her toddler with gentle hums, and the couple sharing quiet conversation over their late breakfast. Madison paused in her movements, catching his eye for a brief moment, a faint smile lingering on her lips, and Liam offered a small nod, an acknowledgment of the silent rhythm they had begun to share, an unspoken understanding of resilience, respect, and care that flowed between them. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves of the nearby trees and carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass from the park across the street, adding a soft, natural harmony to the gentle hum of the diner. Liam adjusted a chair that had been slightly out of place, the scrape of its legs against the tile floor punctuating the quiet, domestic symphony of the morning, and he noticed Madison moving with renewed energy, her posture straightened, the tension in her shoulders eased, and the warmth in her eyes reflecting a calm that mirrored his own. The sunlight shifted again, casting longer shadows across the floor, accentuating the textures and patterns in the worn linoleum, the subtle play of light and shadow giving the room a sense of depth and dimension that made every small motion and glance carry weight and meaning. Liam stepped closer to the coffee machine, refilling a pot with careful attention, the soft hiss of the water mingling with the muted clatter of plates and silverware, and he felt a quiet sense of satisfaction in these simple, deliberate acts, knowing that each moment of care, each gesture of attentiveness, contributed to a larger tapestry of human connection. Madison placed a plate of food onto the counter, and Liam watched as she adjusted the napkin underneath with a small, precise motion, the ordinary act imbued with grace and care, and he realized that the quiet dignity in her movements, the thoughtful consideration in her actions, was a reflection of the values he himself tried to live by. The diner seemed to pulse with a gentle energy, the soft light, the warm scents, and the subtle movements of those within it combining into a cinematic moment, a snapshot of ordinary life elevated by small, meaningful choices. Madison glanced at Liam once more, her eyes softening with acknowledgment and gratitude, and Liam returned a quiet smile, the exchange simple, yet profound, a testament to the enduring impact of attentiveness, kindness, and human connection, as the day continued to unfold around them, carrying with it the promise of hope, trust, and possibility. The noon light began to shift, casting a warm glow across the diner as Liam Parker carried a tray of fresh pastries to a table near the window. The faint clatter of cups and plates blended with the quiet hum of conversation, creating a comforting backdrop that made the room feel alive yet calm. Madison Hart moved efficiently behind the counter, her movements fluid and precise, each gesture reflecting a growing confidence and a sense of control over her space. Liam paused for a moment to observe her, noticing the way her fingers lingered on the edge of the counter as she arranged the condiments, a subtle grace in the way she handled the ordinary details of her work. The sunlight filtering through the windows highlighted the small imperfections in the worn wooden floor, the cracks and scuffs that spoke of years of use and countless mornings like this one, grounding the scene in a sense of realism that made the human interactions feel all the more significant. A few regular customers exchanged quiet greetings, their voices low and warm, the aroma of fresh coffee weaving through the room, mingling with the scent of toasted bread and butter, creating a gentle, almost cinematic atmosphere. Liam placed the tray on the table, his eyes briefly meeting Madison's across the room, and she returned a small, genuine smile, a silent acknowledgment of his quiet presence and the unspoken support that had built between them. Outside, the gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees lining the street, the sound drifting in through the open window and blending seamlessly with the soft, steady rhythm of the diner. Liam returned to the counter, wiping down the surface with deliberate care, the faint squeak of the rag against the laminate marking a steady, comforting cadence that seemed to echo through the space. Madison straightened the line of napkins and checked the placement of the menus, her expression relaxed yet attentive, and Liam felt the subtle shift in energy around them, a quiet momentum building from the small acts of thoughtfulness that filled the morning. The sunlight shifted again, highlighting the steam rising from a cup of coffee left on a table, the curl of vapor catching the light in delicate patterns that mirrored the gentle rise and fall of their breathing. Liam glanced toward the door as it opened slightly, the chime adding a soft punctuation to the rhythm, and he returned his attention to the counter, observing the interplay of ordinary tasks imbued with extraordinary care. Madison paused, catching a stray napkin that had slipped from a stack, and her gaze met Liam's once more. The brief eye contact carrying a quiet understanding and shared recognition that words would have failed to convey. The air seemed to hum with the weight of these small, intentional moments, each act of attentiveness reinforcing the sense of dignity and grace that had quietly woven itself into the morning. Liam set the rag aside, straightened his posture, and took a moment to breathe in the aroma of the diner, feeling the gentle warmth of the sunlight on his skin and the subtle cadence of life continuing around him, a reminder that patience, care, and the quiet persistence of goodness could shape a space and lift the spirit in ways both visible and unseen. Madison moved to serve another customer, her movement steady and confident, and Liam watched with quiet appreciation, noting the resilience and strength that had begun to shine through the ordinary, the unseen layers of character that made the moment feel timeless, a soft, enduring connection grounding both of them in the simple, profound flow of everyday life. The diner had settled into a quiet rhythm, the noon rush fading into a soft lull, leaving only the gentle clatter of utensils and the low hum of conversation threading through the warm air. Liam Parker moved deliberately behind the counter, stacking plates and wiping down the surface with methodical care, each gesture measured and unhurried, a reflection of the calm he carried within himself. Madison Hart refilled the coffee carafes, her movement smooth, almost graceful, the tension of the morning replaced by a steady confidence that seemed to radiate in the gentle lines of her face and the relaxed curve of her shoulders. Liam paused briefly, taking in the scene around him, the soft sunlight streaming through the tall windows, highlighting the worn floors and the small chips in the laminate that marked the passage of countless mornings like this one, and the faint reflection of light dancing across the polished surfaces of the tables. A quiet breeze drifted in through the open door, carrying the scent of warm asphalt and fresh flowers from the planter outside, and the subtle sway of the leaves added a rhythmic accompaniment to the diner's calm ambience. Liam set down a clean plate near the serving area, his fingers lingering for a moment on the edge, appreciating the tactile grounding of the small, ordinary task. Madison glanced up, and their eyes met. Across the room, an unspoken exchange of mutual respect and understanding passing between them, carrying the quiet gravity of shared human experience. The hum of the fluorescent lights above blended with the distant, soft chatter of a couple lingering over lunch, creating a layered soundscape that felt intimate, contained, yet expansive in its reach. Liam refilled his own coffee cup, the rich aroma enveloping him, and he took a slow sip, savoring the warmth and grounding effect it provided, noticing the subtle rise and fall of Madison's chest as she moved among the tables, her steps careful, precise, yet effortless. Outside, the sunlight shifted slightly, casting long, golden beams across the worn floor, illuminating dust motes that hung in the air like tiny suspended stars, and Liam felt the subtle weight of the morning settling into a quiet grace, the ordinary infused with moments of profound human connection. Madison adjusted the placement of a napkin on a plate with meticulous attention, and Liam observed the deliberate care in her actions, recognizing the strength and dignity inherent in her thoughtful gestures. The room seemed to breathe in unison, the gentle rhythm of tasks, movement, and quiet acknowledgment blending into a cinematic tapestry of ordinary life elevated by attention, empathy, and shared human presence. Liam moved past the counter to check on a table near the window, noting the faint warmth of the sunlight on the occupants' faces, and he returned with a subtle smile to Madison, who offered one back, their silent communication imbued with respect and recognition, a gentle confirmation of the quiet trust building between them. The afternoon light grew warmer, softening the edges of the diner and highlighting the interplay of shadows and golden hues, and Liam felt the comfort of these small, deliberate moments, the rhythm of the morning carrying a sense of hope, patience, and quiet anticipation that had begun to thread through the space and linger in the stillness of their shared attention. The late morning light began to soften into the gentle warmth of early afternoon, casting long, golden streaks across the worn wooden floorboards of the diner as Liam Parker moved with quiet purpose among the tables. Madison Hart was arranging the final touches on the condiments and menus, her movements precise yet unhurried, and Liam could not help but notice the subtle relaxation in her posture, the way her shoulders had settled. And the tension that had gripped her earlier in the day now dissolved into something almost serene. The hum of conversation had quieted to a soft murmur, punctuated by the occasional clink of a cup against a saucer or the low rustle of a newspaper being adjusted at the counter, and the soft whir of the coffee machine added a gentle, constant rhythm that seemed to anchor the space. Liam took a moment to lean against the counter, his eyes briefly meeting Madison's across the room, and in that fleeting connection, an unspoken understanding passed between them, carrying the weight of empathy, quiet respect, and recognition that did not require words. The sunlight streamed through the windows at a low angle, illuminating the small imperfections in the tables and the scuffs in the floor, painting the diner in warm, golden hues that lent the ordinary space an almost cinematic quality. Outside, the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant sounds of cars passing along the cracked asphalt created a layered texture of sound that complemented the quiet rhythm within. Liam moved to refill a cup of coffee, the rich aroma mingling with the scent of toasted bread and brewing tea, and as he did, Madison paused in her task and glanced toward him, a small, almost imperceptible smile brushing her lips. The simple act carried a profound resonance, a silent acknowledgment of the human connection that had begun to take root over the course of the morning. Patrons at nearby tables moved with quiet deliberation, some reading newspapers, others quietly conversing, all under the soft glow of the afternoon sun that shifted slightly with the passing of time, elongating shadows and creating pockets of light that danced across the floor. Liam placed the coffee pot back in its stand, taking a deep breath and feeling the gentle cadence of life within the diner, the ordinary actions, wiping a counter, arranging plates, pouring coffee, imbued with quiet grace and the recognition of shared humanity. Madison moved to serve a customer at the counter, her hands steady, her gestures thoughtful, and Liam watched her with quiet appreciation, noting the careful attention to detail that reflected both pride and resilience. The afternoon light continued to shift, casting delicate patterns on the surfaces and illuminating the subtle expressions of the people within the space, each interaction carrying weight and meaning in its simplicity. Liam straightened a chair at a table near the window, observing the way the sunlight caught in the patrons' hair and the small smiles that flickered across their faces, and he felt the subtle warmth of satisfaction that comes from being present, attentive, and engaged in the quiet rhythms of everyday life. Madison's gaze met his once more, a shared recognition passing between them that spoke of patience, kindness, and the gentle unfolding of trust, and in that unspoken exchange, the diner seemed suspended in a moment of quiet dignity, a space where ordinary acts carried extraordinary significance, and where the rhythm of the day flowed seamlessly, enriched by empathy, attentiveness, and the small, powerful gestures that had begun to define their connection. The afternoon sun now slanted low through the tall diner windows, casting warm golden rays that streaked across the worn floor, illuminating the scuffs and imperfections that gave the space its lived-in character. Liam Parker moved with calm intention, wiping down a countertop with careful, deliberate motions, each swipe steady, measured, as if the rhythm of the day itself depended on his quiet attentiveness. Madison Hart stepped lightly behind the counter, arranging freshly brewed coffee and steaming pastries, her movements precise and confident, a subtle ease now visible in the line of her shoulders and the gentle tilt of her head. Liam glanced toward her, noticing the small, almost imperceptible nod she offered, a silent acknowledgment of the shared understanding that had grown between them over the course of the morning and early afternoon. The hum of conversation was soft, punctuated by the occasional clink of silverware or the muted laughter of a few lingering patrons, and the gentle hiss of the coffee machine created a steady rhythm that blended with the sunlit warmth of the room. Liam poured a fresh cup of coffee and inhaled the rich, comforting aroma, the warmth of the liquid in his hands grounding him as he observed the subtle interplay of light and shadow across the tables, the sunlight reflecting in tiny patterns on the worn surfaces. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves of the maples along the street, the faint rustle drifting through the open door, adding a delicate texture to the soundscape within, complementing the low murmurs and soft footsteps inside. Madison carefully placed a plate of food near a window seat, adjusting the napkin beneath it with a precise, thoughtful gesture, and Liam noticed the calm focus in her expression, the quiet dignity in her movements, and he felt a sense of connection to the care she put into every small detail. The sunlight shifted again, catching in the faint dust particles suspended in the air, turning them into tiny golden motes that hovered like floating stars, highlighting the delicate rhythm of the moment. Liam set down the rag he had been using to clean and straightened his posture, feeling a gentle satisfaction in the ordinary yet meaningful tasks that had occupied his morning and early afternoon, the awareness that small acts of care and attention could ripple outward in subtle but significant ways. Madison's eyes met his briefly, her gaze steady and warm, conveying unspoken understanding and shared recognition, and Liam responded with a quiet smile that reflected the trust and connection now subtly woven into the space between them. The diner, bathed in the shifting glow of the sun and filled with the soft cadence of daily life, felt suspended in a serene equilibrium, each movement, glance, and gentle gesture layered with unspoken meaning. Patrons continued their quiet interactions, the soft scrape of chairs and the faint clatter of cups punctuating the air as Liam moved past the counter, observing and acknowledging the presence of each person with thoughtful attentiveness. Madison placed a clean cup of coffee on a tray for a customer and paused for a moment, the light catching in her eyes as she glanced at Liam, the silent acknowledgment between them carrying a depth of respect, understanding, and shared humanity that made the ordinary space of the diner feel quietly extraordinary. The sun shifted once more, highlighting the textures of the worn floor and the soft folds of napkins on tables, and Liam felt the subtle weight of satisfaction and hope in these simple, deliberate moments, each act of care a gentle affirmation of dignity, kindness, and the quiet power of attentiveness that had begun to define the unfolding rhythm of their day. The late afternoon sunlight poured through the tall windows of the diner, bathing the worn floors and chipped tables in a warm, golden glow, casting long, soft shadows that stretched toward the back wall. Liam Parker moved quietly among the tables, arranging chairs with careful precision and wiping down surfaces with steady, deliberate strokes, each motion carrying a subtle weight of attentiveness and care. Madison Hart worked alongside him behind the counter, her hands steady as she filled the coffee cups and aligned the plates, the small smile on her lips reflecting the calm confidence that had grown over the course of the day. Liam paused for a moment near the window, watching the sunlight dance across the floor and the faint reflections in the glass that mirrored the quiet activity within the diner. The hum of conversation had softened into a gentle murmur, the occasional clink of silverware or soft laughter punctuating the space, while the soft hiss of the coffee machine provided a steady, comforting rhythm. Outside, the late afternoon breeze rustled the leaves of the trees along the street, carrying with it the faint scent of cut grass and the distant sounds of passing traffic, blending seamlessly with the atmosphere inside. Liam refilled a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air and mingling with the scent of warm pastries and freshly toasted bread, creating a layered, inviting ambience. Madison moved to serve a table near the window, her gestures precise and thoughtful, and Liam noticed the gentle relaxation in her movements, the subtle easing of tension in her shoulders and the calm focus in her eyes. He set down the coffee pot and straightened his posture, taking a slow breath as he observed the quiet interplay of light, shadow, and human presence around him, each moment infused with dignity and attentiveness. The patrons at the remaining tables moved with quiet deliberation, some reading newspapers, others speaking in soft tones, each action blending into the gentle rhythm of the space. Liam offered Madison a small nod, and she returned it with a faint, knowing smile, the silent acknowledgment between them conveying a depth of trust, understanding, and shared recognition that words could not express. The sunlight shifted again, highlighting the subtle textures of the worn floorboards, the polished edges of the tables, and the dust motes suspended in the air, catching the light like tiny floating stars. Liam moved past the counter to check on a chair that had been slightly out of place, and in that small act, the ordinary chore became a quiet meditation on care, presence, and the dignity found in the simplicity of daily life. Madison placed a clean cup of coffee on a tray and paused for a moment, her eyes meeting Liam's once more, and in that brief glance, the unspoken understanding between them resonated like a quiet chord, a gentle affirmation of empathy, patience, and the enduring impact of kindness. The diner, bathed in warm light and filled with the soft cadence of human movement and quiet attention, seemed to exist in a suspended, almost timeless state, each gesture, glance, and motion layered with significance and imbued with a sense of grace that made the ordinary extraordinary. Liam straightened a napkin on a table near the window, observing the subtle interplay of shadows, the shifting light, and the attentive gestures of Madison, feeling the gentle presence of connection, hope, and shared humanity that had grown through the day, a quiet, profound affirmation of dignity, respect, and the transformative power of simple, deliberate kindness.